friends, and welcome to episode 19 of the Woldenburn podcast. My name is Emily, and I am coming to you from Tennessee in the United States of America, where I live with my husband, and we are currently expecting our first baby in August, which is very, very exciting. I am so glad that you are here today. If you're a new viewer, thank you so much for stopping by and checking out the podcast. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for coming back and watching another episode. Today I have a fairly jam-packed episode for you. I've got a decent amount of knitting and a decent amount of sewing, so hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody. It is a overcast, kind of rainy sort of day out today, so the lighting might be a little bit funny. That's why I'm filming in here instead of in my bedroom where I normally film the podcast. As always, there will be timestamps in the description box below, so if there's only a specific section of the podcast that you would like to watch, you can go right to that section and not mess with any of the rest of it. For knitting, I actually have a finished object this week, which is very exciting. This is my Straya hat, which is a pattern by Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and I knit this as part of her spring knitting challenge that she hosted over Memorial Day weekend this last weekend. And basically the goal was to knit the entire hat in one weekend. I wasn't originally planning to make this hat. I have been eyeing the Straya cardigan for quite some time. I actually own that pattern. I have owned that pattern for some time. I've been wanting to knit it, but I realized when I received Andrea's, it was the Cast On Day newsletter, I realized that it would actually be really fun to knit this hat as kind of a way to experience using a similar pattern as the Straya cardigan and also familiarizing myself with half fisherman's rib, which both Straya patterns use. And I absolutely loved it. It was so much fun. I was able to knit this in 3 days, which honestly blew my mind. And it was such a fun pattern to knit. It fits nice and snug. I'm not going to put it on because I don't want to mess up my hair. But yeah, I absolutely love how it turned out. Here's a close-up of those super squishy, lovely stitches and the bottom. So this hat is knit in a couple of different yarns. The navy blue colorway is the Cloudborn Fibers in their Highland Superwash Sock Twist. And here's some of those details. And I absolutely love this yarn. I've used it in a different colorway to knit my husband a pair of socks, and it's just the squishiest, squidgiest yarn. It's amazing to work with. The only thing to keep in mind with it is that it is a slightly thicker fingering weight yarn. I think it only has it's 178 yards per 50 grams, so it's definitely like a slightly heavier fingering weight, which I don't mind, especially in something like this. It just makes it cozier and squishier and lovelier. I'm almost torn a little bit because now I kind of want to knit my cardigan in this yarn, but I don't know that my budget could stretch to it right now. I might have to wait a bit on that. But that is the main navy colorway of this hat, and then the other two, the yellow and the pink, are just some scraps from my stash. The pink is another, it's a superwash merino nylon blend, like a sock blend, and then the yellow is a tweed base. So I think it's 85% superwash merino and then 15% nep, which is the little tweedy flex. And I absolutely love how it came out. My goal with this was to make sure that it was a hat that I could wear with my primary winter coat. It's a coat that my dad bought for me about 10 years ago at this point, and it's pretty much the only winter coat that I've had since then, and it's this beautiful royal blue, double-breasted, lovely coat, and I just wanted to make sure that whatever I made would go with that coat, because as we are now definitely in summer, it is June now, and it is quite warm here in Tennessee. It was about 90 degrees Fahrenheit yesterday, so very, very warm. I'm not going to be wearing this hat anytime soon. It will have to be bundled away and saved for fall, but yeah, it was just such a pleasure to knit. It was a very simple pattern. If you've never done half fisherman's rib before, Andrea has a whole playlist of tutorials on how to do it. It was really simple, at least for me, to pick it up, and then there are some decreases in half fisherman's rib, but again, she had a video tutorial for it, so I just watched that and it was smooth sailing. So yeah, it also uses a long tail tubular cast on, which I haven't done before. I've done a tubular cast on and I've done a long tail cast on, but never the two of them together. And I also realized that I'm pretty sure that I've been doing my long tail cast ons incorrectly the entire time that I've known how to do them. It was the first cast on that I learned how to do, and I'm pretty sure I've been doing it wrong because I've always heard people talk about how stretchy a long tail cast on is, and I've never found it to be particularly stretchy. If anything, it seemed to be one of the most rigid cast ons, and I think it's just because I've been doing it wrong the whole time. So that was kind of fun to figure out, and now I'm very curious to try the updated long tail cast on that I've learned on a pair of socks and see if it actually would work for it, because I've heard so many people talking about using long tail cast ons for socks, and it's just boggled my mind because I think to myself, how on earth can you possibly get that past your ankle? This is so snug. But I mean, like, look at this. This has got plenty of stretch to it, so I don't know. I'm very curious to try it. So there is project number 1. Project number 2 is actually a half-finished object. I literally just finished this a few minutes ago. And it is the first of my robin socks. So these are just some basic vanilla shorty socks that I am knitting according to my personal standard sock knitting recipe, if you will. I cast on 56 stitches on US size 1 or 2.25 millimeter needles. I knit about 15 rows of 1x1 ribbing. Then I did a kind of standard heel flap and gusset. And then I knit about 60 rows for the foot, and then just did a kind of standard rounded off toe. Yeah, that's basically my standard for every vanilla sock that I make. I am knitting this out of the West Yorkshire Spinners Signature 4-ply in the Robin colorway, which is this. And there's that information. So 75% wool, 25% nylon. It's a lovely, lovely yarn to work with. I absolutely love the print of it. West Yorkshire Spinners, oh my goodness, I've never had an issue with this before. West Yorkshire Spinners has this whole collection of like British birds yarn colorways. I absolutely love them. I want all of them. But the robin was the one that I wanted the most, so I bought it for myself as a treat at the end of last year with the intention of making myself a pair of Christmas socks, because robins and Christmas seem to be very similar to each other. And at least the British robins. Here in America, our robins are definitely more of like a springtime thing, but the British robin, in my mind, just seems to associate with Christmas. That's how my brain works. Anyway, I was intending to make myself a pair of Christmas socks, but then I found out that I was pregnant, and that kind of threw a wrench in a lot of my creative plans in December, but it's fine. I get to make them now. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I went ahead and I just cast on the very tiniest little bit of my second sock, which is actually how I get around any sort of second sock syndrome. Is basically the minute that I cast off the first sock, I will immediately cast on the second sock, because then it's on my needles and it's a project, and therefore I have to work on it. And I mainly have this as just my sort of mindless, I can take this when we go to church, or if we're out and about, or hanging out with family, or anything like that. It's kind of a very nice, mindless sort of a thing. I haven't worked on it in a bit, and then I started working on it again a little bit last night, and I was like, oh man, I forget how fun socks are to knit. So That's project number 2. And then project number 3 that we're going to talk about. Actually, I'm going to do a little bit of a knitting update, I guess you could say. I decided between last podcast and this podcast episode to go ahead and frog my Lofoten sweater, which is a pattern that I was knitting. It's a pattern designed by the amazing and beautiful Emily at the Blue Mouse Knits. I absolutely love her patterns, and I love her channel, her podcast, everything about her. She's one of my favorite online knitting community people. And I decided to go ahead and frog it, even though I do really love the pattern. I just was not in love with the project. I did not like how the colors were coming out. If you remember, I was very, very excited about it when I originally started it. I loved how the yellow was looking at everything. And then when I added in that second color, it was almost as if all of the joy on that project just vanished, which was quite sad. And I worked on it still anyway for a while, kind of hoping that maybe it was just a random fluke, if you will, but I just didn't want to work on it, and gradually I just kind of stopped working on it. And I'm not the type of person that just likes to have whips sitting around cluttering up my studio space, or I honestly feel like they just clutter up my brain. If they're just sitting there and they're not being worked on, they just feel like this kind of looming cloud hanging over my head. And I can only handle so many of those. And I realized that I would much prefer to have the yarn frogged and back in my stash that I could use for another project rather than having that sweater just sitting there. So I definitely do want to knit another Lofoten sweater. I absolutely love that pattern, but it's not going to happen in those yarns. And actually, the yellow in this hat is from that sweater. That has been frogged and removed from the needles. And I now only have one sweater project on the go. And it is my So Faded sweater, which is another pattern by Andrea Mowry. Not gonna lie, she's one of my favorite knitting pattern designers. Pretty much every design that she's come out with, not everyone, but a high percentage of the patterns that she has designed, I've ended up just absolutely loving. And they're so well written. I love the way that they're laid out. It's amazing. And then also I've been watching her I'll Knit If I Want To knitting podcast where she kind of answers questions and stuff. And it just makes me like Andrea Mowry as a person even more, which makes me like her knitting patterns even more. It is funny how if there's a knitting pattern designer that I disagree with or I don't think might be the nicest person, it kind of impacts how I think about their pattern designs. Even if they're beautiful, I'm like, So it's always nice to find designers that I really like and think look like amazing people, in addition to being absolutely brilliant knitting pattern designers. All of that to say, I basically want to knit all of her patterns. But right now, I am working on my So Faded sweater, which is this beautiful, simple raglan sweater that has the option that you could do it all in one color, but it's specifically part of her Faded collection where you can use multiple colors of yarn, which is exactly what I wanted to do with this one. I have so many single skeins of my hand-dyed yarns left in my stash, and it's so hard because they're beautiful. I love how they turned out, but it takes more than one skein of yarn to make a sweater, and I really want to make more garments because those are the things that I end up wearing the most of my hand knit things, other than socks. But I just don't want to use all of my beautiful hand-dyed yarns just for socks. So I was really happy to be able to cast this on. And this is what we're looking at. We've got it in this mauve pink. Then this beautiful, beautiful variegated yarn. I absolutely love this colorway. I wish I had the recipe so I could, or that I remembered how to do it. I'm pretty sure with this one there was a mini skein collection that I did that was sort of like a fall mini skein collection, and I don't think I saved any of the recipes for those. They were specifically intended for sort of one-of-a-kind colorways. I absolutely love how it came out. It just looks so lovely. And then I have just this plain sort of variegated brown. It's an interesting brown in that it is kind of a cool tone. It has almost like a bluey undertone. So yeah, I absolutely love how these three colors work together. They ended up being pretty much perfect because in the variegated yarn, there's little bits and pieces of both of a color that's very similar to this mauve pink and a color that's very, very similar to this brown. And so they just looked amazing together, and I'm super, super excited to have an actual sweater out of them. As you can see, I have knit the entirety of the body. I knit this on a US size 5 knitting needle, and the ribbing was done on a US size 3. And this ribbing here at the top is going to be folded over and stitched down, so it'll be a fold over neckline. And then I am in the process of working on the first sleeve. Now this sleeve has been taking me quite some time because I keep kind of going back and forth on how I want to knit it, and by that I mean what knitting needles I want to use. I was doing magic loop, but then I didn't love the needle that I was using for magic loop, so I've switched to double pointed needles, and it's going a lot faster now, so I'm happy about that. Someday I'm going to have a whole collection of knitting needles, and I'll be able to do socks on magic loop, but for right now, the needles that I have just don't... I don't love knitting smaller circumferences magic loop on those needles, so it's my hope to be able to get a couple different brands. I'd love to get some of the Lika or Leica needles and try those out. I'd love to get a couple more Chiagu needles and a couple of the Hi Sharps needles and just kind of try out all of them and figure out what's like my favorite needle. Most of the needles that I currently use are just the inexpensive ones that I've had ever since, the ones you could get from any sort of a big box store. So they're nothing special, nothing fancy. So it makes things like knitting in magic loop where you really need like a good flexible cable. Those aren't always those knitting needles are not that great for that. That's the progress I have on that. This is all on a 75-25 superwash merino nylon base, and I'm knitting the third size, if I remember correctly, the 38-inch bust, I believe it is. And I'm so excited for this to get done. There's a number of different garment patterns that I would love to start knitting on, but I'm trying to behave myself and really make sure that I finish this one and it just doesn't sit. Because again, I don't like whips sitting around. But yeah, I think it's going to be so lovely and it's going to be absolutely perfect come fall time. I have made the body a little bit cropped, so that's going to be lovely for wearing with skirts and things once I'm not pregnant and can actually wear more skirts again. I'm having the hardest time finding a good skirt that I want. I very much dislike wearing jeans and trousers and pants and things of that sort, and it's made it a little challenging because I'm very, very sensitive in my ribcage if anything remotely tight. It just starts making me look kind of sick and really uncomfortable, and that has made wearing skirts very difficult. But anyway, that was a random tangent. I am very excited for fall time, and I'll be able to, once I can wear skirts again, I can wear this with a lovely sort of like blue or navy skirt. I think that would be so cute. Yeah. And then we have one more knitting project to show you, which is actually a new cast on, and I am very excited to talk about it. Okay, so this last project, I'm actually going to, before I show you the project, pull out the yarn that I am knitting it in. Oh, I'm so happy with these colorways. These are all more of my hand-dyed yarns. This is another pile of my single skeins of hand-dyed yarns. And this is what we're looking at. Aren't they just lovely together? They're so springy and perfect. So let me show you these in a little bit of closer detail. These are all, again, on a 75-25 superwash merino nylon fingering weight base. So first we have this kind of creamy speckled one, which I absolutely love, but I was never going to wear this in a garment because I don't like super light colors on me. Then we have this variegated green that has some light speckling in it. There are random little pops of blue or yellow, very, very sporadically interspersed. I think there's kind of a blue somewhere in there that you might be able to see. The next one is this sort of, it's halfway between like a mauve and a violet, and it's just another variegated, lightly speckled colorway. It's just got like some pops of sort of gray in there. Really like this color. And then this one is just a mix of sort of a beige tan color and then pink in varying degrees of saturation of the pink. You know what I mean. And I absolutely love all of these colorways, and I have for a very long time. They've just been sitting in my stash and waiting for me to come up with something to do with them. And I was thinking about trying to do some type of a shawl or maybe a sweater, but then I was like, these are all, oops, sorry, I kicked my tripod. These are all fairly light colors, and I don't know that I would want them in a sweater. I was going to make the Habitation Throw by Helen Stewart, but it's a pattern that I've seen. I've seen Molly of a Homespun House knit it, and it just looks so lovely, and I absolutely love how that blanket looks. I think it would be a fantastic blanket to have. And I have almost started knitting it, probably 3 or 4 times at this point. But every time I'm just on the cusp of about to cast it on, I will pull the pattern and I will open it up. And I just cannot stand how Helen Stewart has her pattern layout, which sounds absolutely terrible. And I know that I probably could wallow through and figure it out and it would be better. I know that a lot of people actually really, really like how she has her patterns laid out, but I personally just do not like it. It's so confusing, and I just don't like it. And so I have yet to knit that pattern, even though I very much want to. I just get caught up on how that pattern is laid out, and it just drives me insane every single time. So this time was no different. I opened it up and I was about to like try and start doing it, and I was just like, I can't. So instead, I decided to just kind of make my own sort of blanket pattern, and I'm so happy with how this is turning out. I absolutely love it. Let me show you what I have. So, there's not too much going on at the moment. Here we go. Got all these colors together. This is going to be the squidgiest, loveliest blanket I have ever made, and I am so excited about it. I am knitting this out of bias knit squares. This is going to be my patchwork knit blanket, and it is all in garter stitch, so it's super mindless. It's the most beautiful thing to work on because I don't have to follow a pattern. I don't have to think about anything. It's just knitting, and you do a decrease and you knit a plain row and you knit a row with a decrease, and it's absolutely lovely. It is definitely one of my favorite projects at the moment. This is very similar in style to the Cozy Memories blankets that just took the knitting world by storm several years ago. I don't think I've heard really anybody talking about them in recent years. It is just composed of these bias knit squares with the center double decrease, and I'm not following a specific pattern for this. I cast on 61 stitches, so it's, let me see if I can show you this, 30 for this side, 1 for the middle, and then 30 for the other side. And then I just, like I said, do a center double decrease every other row, all the way up until I have 1 stitch left. And then we just pull the tail through that stitch and you're good to go. Here's the back. There's some ends that you can see. One of the most beautiful things about doing a blanket this way is that I can use all of these colorways of yarn, but I don't have to do any sort of seaming, which I'm just not in the mood for, so it ends up working out perfectly. Because basically you, like with this one, I picked up all the stitches along this square and along this square, and now I'm working on this one. And I'm just going to be doing this in rows, so it will be, let me see, this is really difficult to explain. This is the bottom corner, and then I'm going to keep expanding out this way and out this way. And I'm going to do it in the rows of the colors, so it will be in the repeat of the purple, you can't even see that, purple, variegated cream, green, pink and beige, and then purple, variegated cream, pink and beige. It'll make more sense as it gets bigger. But yeah, I just love how this is coming out. I'm basically just going to make it as big as I possibly can and use up all of these skeins of yarn, which would be magical to have them out of my stash and in an actual project. Yeah, that is my final knitting project, and if you've never tried knitting a bias square, I highly recommend it. They're really fun. That is the end of my primary knitting segment of the podcast, but I'm actually going to be starting to add in a new knitting related segment of the podcast that's going to be my knitting inspiration part of the podcast. And this section is going to be talking about knitting pattern designers or knitting patterns or knitting podcasts, basically the knitting related things that are making me feel incredibly inspired. And this is kind of sparked by a specific podcast. It is unfortunately not one that is currently active at the moment, but it is one of my all-time favorite knitting podcasts, and it was one of the first knitting podcasts that I ever discovered and absolutely fell in love with the wonderful woman behind it. And it is the Inside Number 23 podcast, which is hosted by Katie. And I absolutely love that podcast. Like I said, it was one of the very first knitting podcasts that I ever discovered, and Katie sounds like just the most wonderful human being. And she hasn't done any sort of regular podcast episodes for quite some time, which I totally understand. She has 2 little girls now, and parenting can be a lot of work. But I randomly, last week or the week before, I think one of her videos popped up in my YouTube feed, and I just got this wave of nostalgia, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna watch that. So basically, I have gone back and started rewatching her backlog of knitting podcast episodes, and I started at like 30 or something, and I've just been watching them all. I'm up to like 55 or something now, and oh goodness, I love her podcast so much. Even though it's not currently being updated, I do so highly recommend you go and check it out. She talks about knitting and sewing and just yarn and crafting, and I love watching it. She just seems like the loveliest person. But in watching that, I feel like it has also sparked a lot of my knitting mojo and inspired me to just keep doing more knitting. And yeah, so please go check it out. I'm staying subscribed. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that someday she'll be able to make some more podcast episodes, because I would just absolutely love that. But while I was watching that, it has, oh, goodness me, there are so many patterns or designers that she has talked about that then I go and look up, and I've fallen in love with their designs, and I've added a ton of these patterns to my Ravelry wish list, which I am going to link down below so that you can take a look at it and look at all of the beautiful patterns that I have kind of compiled in there. But today I specifically wanted to talk about three patterns that have just been, oh, I want to cast them on so badly. The first pattern is the Featherweight Cardigan by Hannah Fettig, and this is a pattern that I have loved for years. I've wanted to knit it for so long. Like back when I originally was watching these podcast episodes of Katie, and I was watching the Wool and Vine podcast, which is hosted by Kristen of Wool and Vine Yarns. At the time it was the Yarngasm podcast, and she was talking about the Featherweight Cardigan, and between the two of them I wanted to knit it so bad. But I never ended up purchasing it and actually getting it started, and so I kind of had half forgotten about it. Then I was rewatching these episodes and she was talking about it again. Katie was wearing her featherweight cardigan. I was just like, oh my goodness, that would be so perfect of a cardigan for cooler summer evenings or in the springtime or early fall. Like, it's just such a beautiful layering piece, and I just love it so much. And I am pretty sure that once I finish my So Faded sweater that I'm gonna have to cast it on. I just need to actually get about purchasing that pattern, because it's that pattern, and then there's another Hannah Fettig pattern actually. This is a bonus inspiration pattern. I believe it's like the honey flower cardi, which is a very similar style of a cardigan, but it has like some lace or texture stitches on it, and I love both of those cardigans so much. So that's the first one that's been very much inspiring me. And then the next two are actually sock patterns. And these are patterns that have a nostalgic value for me. They're two socks that I knit right back at the very beginning when I first started knitting socks, and I kind of forgot about them, to be honest. The first one is the Hermione's Everyday Socks, which is a pattern by Erica Luder. I love this sock pattern so much. I have knit probably 3 different types of pairs, or different versions of the Hermione's Everyday Sock pattern. Goodness. I don't currently own any. I have passed some of those off, donated them or whatever. And Katie was talking about it and it reminded me of the pattern. I was just like, oh my goodness, I need to knit another pair of those because they're so amazing. They're like a step above a vanilla sock. It's a very simple pattern to remember. I think it's like a 4-row repeat. It's a free pattern on Ravelry, and I love it. I love it so much. It's really simple, really beautiful. I absolutely love it. So I have to cast that one on at some point very soon. Probably after I finish my other robin sock, and then I have my second freckle sock that is languishing, and I need to get it done. It's in my basket over here. And then the second sock that has been making me feel very inspired is the Mercury Socks by Kim Drotar. It's another free pattern on Ravelry, and this was, I think, maybe the second or third sock that I ever knit, like second or third sock pattern that I ever knit. And I knit it out of this, it was this pink speckled yarn. And I bought it at a smaller independent yarn store, and so I was very excited about it. I didn't know enough about yarn weights at the time to realize that it was a very like heavy fingering weight. Probably a sport weight. It was honestly probably more of a sport weight. And those socks turned out absolutely massive. They were so big, and I kept them for the longest time, but I just couldn't wear them because they were too big. And I was so proud of myself for doing them, because the Mercury socks are kind of an all-over lace sock pattern, and it's a very simple lace pattern. And I was so proud of myself for having made them, but they just didn't turn out right. And Katie was talking about it in her podcast episodes, and again, it just reminded me that that sock pattern exists, and I realized that it would be absolutely perfect for more of like a summery, warmer weather type of a sock. I'm not a huge fan of lace socks in general, just because, I don't know, I feel like the airflow is a little bit strange, which sounds really weird. But in the fall and wintertime, when it's cold outside, I don't like it when there's airflow on my feet. But I realized that the lace patterns, or lace socks, would actually be perfect for like spring and summer when it's kind of warming up and maybe you're a little chilly and you want some socks, but you don't mind them being a little breezy. So my plan is to knit a shorty pair of socks out of the Mercury sock pattern. And I am so excited. It's in my brain now, all of these patterns, and I just feel like I have to knit them. So, watch the Inside Number 23 podcast at your peril, because Katie is just such an inspiring human being. Okay, that takes us to the end of the knitting inspiration segment of the podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I definitely planning to make this a reoccurring portion of the podcast. The reason why is just because there are so many lovely knitting patterns and knitting designers and knitting podcasts that there's so many of them that I absolutely love, and especially when it comes to knitting patterns, I will never be able to knit all of them. And so I think that it's a nice way to be able to feature different patterns or designers or whatnot that I love, and hopefully inspire some of you to maybe try out some of their patterns or just take a look at it when I know that I will never be able to knit all of them. So that's kind of my thought processes behind it. But let's go ahead and jump into some sewing. I have a finished project and another work in progress to show you. I also realized that technically, probably should have mentioned this at the top of the episode. Completely forgot about it, but it works. We'll pop it in here into the sewing segment. What am I wearing? This is a modified Jennifer Lauren handmade Felicity dress that I finished recently. I'll kind of stand up and show you a little bit. So there we go. Super cute gathered skirt, inseam pockets, and I modified this to have snaps and elastic at the neckline so that it will be breastfeeding friendly for once I have this baby. Because that's kind of my goal for anything that I make at this point. I want it to be maternity friendly or breastfeeding friendly. And the reason for that is that my husband and I are definitely planning to have more than one child, and I know we kind of want to have them fairly close together. And so I know that for the next few years, I'm probably going to be in a pretty regular cycle of either pregnancy or breastfeeding. So I don't really want to make anything that I can't wear for like 3 years or something, or it's something that I can only wear for a couple of hours and then I have to take my clothes off and put on something else to feed the baby. If you haven't been here before, I hate changing clothes. Very much so. So it's just not realistic for me to trying to make something or making something that I will basically have to undress and redress myself every time I need to feed the baby. So I'm trying to be very, very intentional about the things that I make, that they are all accessible, basically. So this first one is one that I have a sewing vlog that I am going to be working on putting together, that I videoed myself making this, and I also mentioned this I think in the last episode, I think. And it is Simplicity 9538, which is a vintage reproduction pattern, and it's this beautiful peasant blouse. And I made version A right here, which is the plainest version you can make. And the thing that really drew me to this pattern was that gusset right there that's underneath of the arm. And that is a vintage detail in a lot of vintage dresses or tops or whatnot, and it's in vintage patterns. It's not really in modern day patterns, and I think it was such a clever design thing. And it makes me really sad that modern day patterns don't have it. And basically what that gusset under your arm does is that when you're wearing a blouse, you can do this and your whole blouse doesn't pull up at the side. So if you have it like tucked into a skirt or whatever, it's going to stay put for the most part. And I just think it's so sad that modern day patterns and fashion designers and stuff have kind of eliminated that, because it's such a practical, nice sort of a thing to have in a blouse or a dress. So I have my version that I made in this really cute gingham fabric. It's sort of a rusty burnt orange. It's coming up a little bit brighter of orange on screen. And here we go. Just kind of get an idea. And it has this elastic at the neckline, an elastic in the sleeves, and then this wonderful gusset underneath the arm. I still need to wash it. There's some water soluble marks on there. Yeah, I'm super happy with how it came out. It was such a quick sew. It only has 4 pattern pieces, and there's no buttons, there's no zippers, which means that it comes together really, really quickly. The hardest part was just kind of fiddling with the bias binding, and I didn't have the neatest intersection here where the bias binding meets, so it looks a little funny, but shh, no one will notice. And I have popped a little tag in here in the back. This is just a scrap of bias binding. And the reason I did that is because this is very similar on the front and the back. Like, they're very, very similar pieces. They're just slightly different, and especially with this fabric, it's really hard to tell the difference between the front and the back. So that just makes it so I don't have to worry about it. That's the back. So yeah, like I said, this was a very, very easy pattern to put together. I had such a ridiculously, laughably hard time with just one of the gussets under the sleeve. I was so frustrated at it. The reason for it was because this fabric doesn't have a distinctive right and wrong side, and so I kept accidentally stitching that gusset on upside down, wrong way around. I was like, ooh, this is a notch, this is the little dot mark, everything lines up, cool, we're good to go. And then I would go to sew it to the next piece and be like, you have sewn this in upside down again. Come on. I think I had to unpick it about 4 times. Like, I was just so peeved at it. I was like, come on, this shouldn't be that complicated. Because the other one went in fine. Like, I did them at the same time, and the other one was perfect, and it was fine, it was going good. And then I realized that the first one was a little funny, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll unpick this and it'll be fine. Stitch it back together, go to sew it back in. I'd screwed it up again, picked it out, sewed it back in. I'd go to stitch it in. I'd messed it up again. Like, this happened like 3 or 4 times, and it's just because the fabric was not distinctive enough of a right and a wrong side that it just kept throwing me off. But I got there in the end, and that's what really counts. So with this, I had planned to wear it with some maternity overalls that I was purchasing from Old Navy, but I got them and they just were so unflattering and did not fit well and didn't feel great, and so I returned those. Which means that now this blouse is going to languish in my closet until I can figure out a skirt solution, or yeah, I'm not sure, it might languish for a bit, which I'm very sad about. I think it's super cute, and I love that it has this peasant blouse aspect so that if I need be, I can just pull it down over my shoulder or pull it up because it's a blouse for breastfeeding access. And I think it's so cute, and I would love to make a few more of these, especially in a slightly lighter weight fabric. I think like a Swiss dot or a proper cotton lawn. It would be so comfortable and so cute. I very much dislike wearing t-shirts. They're just, I don't know why, I just don't really like the classic like jeans and t-shirt outfit is one of my least favorite outfits, which is really funny because that used to be pretty much all that I would wear, was kind of frumpy t-shirts and jeans. Like, that was it. And I don't like wearing jeans and t-shirts anymore. I love sort of like button-up blouses or things like this where they have a little bit of detail to them, but I just don't like t-shirts. So I would love, 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 love to have a few more of these blouses. I think that they would go into my wardrobe so perfectly. But it doesn't mean that I have to figure out something to do with skirts because I just don't have any that work, really. Or no solid color ones. That's my problem. I have no solid colored tops and no solid colored skirts that would work with other things. And so that's something that I'm trying to rectify in my wardrobe. But I was really excited for this because I had a whole little outfit planned out, some super cute overalls and this peasant blouse, like, oh, cutest outfit ever. And then the overalls didn't work, so rude. But yeah, so hopefully sometime soon here I will be able to figure out the skirt situation. I'm hoping to make, I'm thinking like a blue skirt, either navy blue or a slightly lighter colored blue. I just have to get the fabric for it. I haven't done that yet. This is why like 90% of the time I sew anything, it's a dress, because dresses are easy. But sometimes I want the flexibility and the options of a blouse and a skirt. So I just need to get better about like making a couple of solid colored blouses and some solid colored skirts. Anyway, the next sewing project that I have, I will pop a picture of the pattern up here. I am making the sorrel dress by Jennifer Lauren Handmade. I absolutely love Jennifer Lauren Handmade. If you couldn't tell, I'm wearing the Felicity dress, which is her design. I have 3 of these in my closet that I can wear right now, and I have 3 of them that are packed away in a box because my baby bump got too big. And they're also not breastfeeding friendly. And I have made, I think at this point, I've made about a dozen of the Felicity dresses, which is not an overestimate. I had a couple that I made previously that I no longer own, but it's getting close to a dozen of them. I just love this pattern so much. But I realized it was probably time to branch out a little bit, just slightly, and let's make a different Jennifer Lauren Handmade pattern. So I'm making this sorrel dress, and again I'm going to stand up a little bit. And this is what we're working on right now. It's this beautiful shirt dress pattern with grown-on sleeves, which I absolutely love. That's one of my favorite sewing pattern designs, is grown-on sleeves. I think they just look so good on me, and I love it. So anyway, I have this. We've got the bodice here. I have replaced the skirt that comes with the pattern with a gathered skirt. So you can kind of see that here. I've just stitched the skirt to the bodice, and I've popped in inseam pockets. Let me sit back down here. Oof. And yeah, I absolutely love it. I shortened the bodice by about an inch, I think it was, and I have completely left off the front waist darts because I have a bump that is rapidly growing. In the last week, it has seemed to, like, it's crazy, but it makes sense because I'm at like 30 weeks now, so I should have a large bump. I'm expecting to have a large baby, and I'm okay with that. Like, that's fine. I want a nice, chunky, fat, healthy baby. And anyway, I'm loving how this is coming out so far. I just need to stitch the facing pieces on, and then it has this beautiful sort of fold over collar that, like, once the facing is on, it'll be the boats. So it'll fold over kind of like that. Can't really see it too well. There we go. And I think it's just going to be so cute and so summery and absolutely lovely to have and be able to wear, I'm hoping. I feel like in the last, like I said, week with, I guess, baby boy is going through a growth spurt or something, because I feel like even in the last week or so, there's been a couple of my dresses that I'm like, oof, I can't wear this anymore. It's too tight over the waist. Like, this dress is almost a little snug just because of where the waist seam hits. It kind of depends. It varies. It depends upon the day or how I'm sitting or whatever. Sometimes the seam will kind of cut in a little bit and I'm like, ugh. So hopefully this one will fit fine and we'll be good to go. Yeah, I really love it. This fabric is some fabric that I got from Hobby Lobby, along with, that's where I got this fabric as well. And yeah, it's just a really nice cotton. I love the sailboat print. I love boats and blue things, and I think it's just so cute. They look like vintage sailboats from like a vintage picture book, which I absolutely love. I love vintage picture books. But yeah, so that's the one that, this is the dress that I'm currently working on. I am planning to make that dress. I want to make another Deer and Doe Mysotis dress. I have 2 of those and they have been absolutely perfect to wear during this pregnancy because of the Empire waistland and they're very like sort of loose fit. Plus, since they have those buttons down the front, it makes it perfect for breastfeeding access. And so I want to make at least 1, if not 2 more of those. And then I've been so tempted by the Style Arc Montana dress. A lovely commenter, I believe it was on my last podcast episode or maybe the one before, mentioned that they were making the Style Arc Montana dress, which I had not heard of before. And so I went and looked it up and I just fell in love. It looks so simple. I could super easily modify it to have buttons just to the waist. It's kind of that loose, oversized fit that I am all about these days. And I want it so badly. I have the perfect fabric for it. It's this one, which I think it would just look absolutely amazing in with some white buttons down the front. I just can't get that image out of my head, and I just haven't bought the pattern because it's like $14. And my brain is just like, oh goodness, it's $14. Like, oh man, can the budget stretch to that? So at some point I'm pretty sure that's going to happen because I want it so badly, and I think that it would look absolutely amazing in this fabric. And I want to like sew with this fabric. But it was just one of those things that that lovely commenter left that comment. I went and looked at it, and it was like the next day I went and got fabric, and I just haven't been able to get it out of my head that this and that pattern are the perfect match for each other. So probably at some point that will be showing up. So I have that one, and then yeah, like I said, the mysotis, and I think those are probably going to be the main ones that I'm going to try and make right now. I was thinking about making the deer and doe cardamom dress, but I think I might hold off on that one just because of how my body is changing and whatnot, and the waistline even on these Felicity dresses has been a little bit iffy, and so I'm worried that I would make it and I just wouldn't be able to wear it for a while. So I think I'm going to stick with like the mysotis dress. And did I have anything else? I think that was really the main one. That one and the Montana dress are the two that are kind of like floating, bouncing around in my head. Although I have been thinking about possibly making the Tilly and the Buttons either the Coco dress or a modified Agnes dress. We'll see. I feel like that's kind of, we're getting a bit off the rails here, so let's rein it back in. That is all that I have in the way of creative content for this particular podcast episode. If that's all that you're here for, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. If you'd like to hear about a couple of books that I've been reading, I just have two pretty short little segment here. Yeah, then that's what we're gonna talk about now. Okay, so last podcast episode, I talked for like 20 minutes about books, and I need to get better about that because I know that not everybody is that interested in books, and sometimes I get carried away. I've been thinking about it this week about potentially switching back over and having two channels and having a book channel and a creative content lifestyle channel. I would love to know what you think. If you like hearing me talk about books or dislike it or prefer it to just be about creative content or don't really care, I would so value your opinion if you would like to chime in a comment down below. I would absolutely love that. But since I have not decided that yet, we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of books that I've been reading this last couple of weeks. And in my previous episode, I was talking about romance books and, you know, how sometimes they were kind of too smutty for my taste. And I think I mentioned in there that sometimes I kind of go through phases where I'll read them and then I get kind of tired of them because the writing seems very trite and shallow sometimes. And that kind of happened very quickly this time. I had a very short period where I read like maybe 4 or 5 of these different romance books, and then I was like, okay, I'm over it. I want something else. So I picked up an old favorite. Oh, I love this so much. The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is one of my all-time favorite literary characters. I read his books voraciously, or the books about him. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was the one that wrote it. And I read all of the books when I was quite a little girl and just absolutely loved it. I found it so fascinating. I would read them again and again. And last year, I have been for such a long time wanting to get a whole collection of the Sherlock Holmes books, all like in a matching set, just because I love them so much. And I've seen a few of them, but so many times they wouldn't have the casebook. They would have The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and I think it's The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. They would never have the casebook of Sherlock Holmes. And I don't know why. I think it might have been because the casebook was published later. And it drove me nuts because I wanted the whole collection of Sherlock Holmes stories. And then at the end of last year, the Wordsworth Collector's Edition released the entire collection of Sherlock Holmes in these books. And I saw them, I think it was on Book Depository, and I about swooned. I was just like, this is the moment that I have been waiting for. Like, I pretty much immediately bought them, and it was like I think they were about like $12 or $13 a piece, and they're about $6, and it was one of those things, I took money out of savings. I was like, this is what I have wanted for such a long, long time, years. I used to have a collection that was the whole collection, but it was just one volume. I really dislike it when they do that with books because it makes it so bulky and hard to read. Anyway, this is what this looks like. I actually have the entire Sherlock Holmes collection in the Wordsworth Collector's Edition, and I have the entire Jane Austen novels, all of her novels, in the Wordsworth Collector's Edition. And I love them. I think they're some of the most beautiful books, and it makes me so happy to see them sitting up on my shelf. So anyway, I got done with reading some of those romance books, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh, I want to read something kind of that I know that I'll like. And I've been meaning to reread Sherlock Holmes for quite some time, and I was just like, why not? Why not now? Just go ahead and grab it and read through these beautiful, beautiful books. So that's what I'm doing. And you will notice in this one is actually the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes and His Last Bow, which is like another collection of Sherlock Holmes stories. And they did that with a couple of them. I think they combined, like, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, I think it was like 4 sort of like longer short stories, almost novel length. And so I think they combined like 2 of those in one book, 2 of those in another book. So it's like the Silent Four and Scarlet something, or The Hound of the Baskervilles, and there was another one, I can't remember it off the top of my head. So I don't mind that, like, that's fine, because both of them are kind of small enough that even with both of those, both the Casebook and His Last Bow, it's not too big of a book. I started reading this, and then while I was reading this, I also had this moment of, I want to read a Redwall book, which is never not the case for me. But there are about, I think it's 5 of the Redwall books that don't have the audiobooks. I don't know why they never ended up doing it. I know with the final book in the series, The Rogue Crew, they didn't do the audiobook because sadly Brian Jakes had passed away before that book was actually even published or released. And so I know that's why they didn't do that one. But there's, let's see, I think it's at least 5 that were earlier books. Lord Brocktree, Moral Fox, Legend of Luke. There are a number of them, but they just didn't make an audiobook for. And so those are ones that I haven't read or obviously listened to as many times. Of all the other books in the series, I have read the books probably 15 times a piece and listened to the audiobooks at least 15 times a piece of each of one of them. So I've listened to them a lot. But every now and then I'll be like, ooh, I haven't experienced this particular Redwall story in a while, so I'm going to go and reread it. And that is what happened. I read Pearls of Lettra, which is such a lovely, lovely book. I love the whole Redwall series. They're so good. In this particular one, it's really interesting because as the villain, it has a pine marten, but then it also has monitor lizards, which is really fascinating because there's lizards like of that sort of like villainous lizard. Never comes up in any of the other books, so it's kind of a particularly fascinating one. This one is really good because it introduces Tansy, who becomes Mother Abbess of Redwall. She's a hedgehog, she shows up later in The Long Patrol, which is, oh, I love that book. The Long Patrol and Raggedy Tam are probably like my top 2 favorite Redwall books. They're really high up there. I also like Mossflower. We're not going to get into it. I like all of them. But I really like this one because it's kind of introduces certain characters, and it's also really different. There's like a sea voyage where they have to go sailing across the sea to rescue the kidnapped abbot of Redwall, and there's this quest. They have to find these 6 pearls that have been hidden around Redwall Abbey, and yeah, it's so good. It's got fantastic otter characters, which are like my favorite characters. I love the otters. It's got a hare. Obviously, you can't have Redwall without a hare. Yeah, it's just a good Redwall book. So I highly recommend the entire Redwall series, especially the audiobooks. If you don't have time to read, just listen to the audiobooks. They're so good. I love them so much. I actually just finished listening to The Sable Queen, and I just started listening to Eulalia, so I'm a little obsessed. Just a little bit. But that's okay. I don't mind. I like to have my own fandom here. Anyway, that is all that I have as far as books. I am trying to decide what I'm gonna read next. I started reading They Came to Baghdad by Agatha Christie, which was one that I read last year and just fell in love with. I kind of had a massive Agatha Christie kick last year over the summer and read pretty much all of the books that the library had by her. And I'm kind of just rereading a few books, and I have Anne of Green Gables, that series that I want to finish reading through. I just haven't been in the right frame of mind for it. And I have a Georgette Heyer book. Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to figure out like what I'm in the mood for. I'm very much a mood reader, and I don't really try and force myself to read a book if it's gonna make me annoyed at it. Anyway, that is all that I have for the Books and More segment of the podcast, which means that we are now at the end of this podcast episode. I feel like it's been a fairly chatty one. There's been a lot of stuff going on. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you again so much for just hanging out with me, spending time with me today. If you like this video, feel free to like, and if you would like to see more videos, feel free to subscribe. And again, I would absolutely love to know your opinion on whether or not you like hearing about things like books in addition to the creative living sort of aspects of the podcast, or if you would prefer to have them kind of separated. I'd be really, really interested to know. So please do, if you have an opinion. If you don't care and you don't have an opinion, that's fine. Don't worry about it. But if you do care and you do have an opinion, I would absolutely love to hear it. If you would leave a comment down below. Yeah. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I am so glad that you were here. I hope that you have a wonderful week, that you have some wonderful projects that are bringing you so much joy to work on, and I will see you very, very soon on the next one. Bye.